Jamie Peck. My bad. So Jamie is speaking as part of the Block Cop City coalition. She's speaking with a presentation, and we're going to do some breakout groups that will be facilitated to kind of have some community discussions after the talk. So with that said, give a round of applause for Jamie.
Thank you for coming, everybody, to talk about this very important issue. Thank you to everybody else who's spoken already. And welcome to the Weelaunee Worldwide Mass Action Speaking Tour. That's great. I'm Jamie Peck. I'm your friendly Block Cop City representative. Did you guys get the handouts that were in the back called an invitation? Do you have them? Okay. Well, sometimes I like to have everyone take turns reading it to, you know, get in the mood. Oh, okay, we're doing it. Well, while you hand those out, why don't we play the hype video first?
Come on, man.
Oh, no. Ah, jeez.
Don't call it a comeback.
It's better when it's louder, but you get the idea. So now I'd like to, if some folks, you got the invitation? All right, I would like to invite you all to read it. Everyone can take a paragraph starting with the beginning. You want to start with the first paragraph?
Sure. This is an invitation, a call to action. Join us for a mass mobilization in Atlanta, Georgia to defend the forest and stop Cop City. On the morning of November 13th, masses of people from across the city and country will gather in the Weelaunee forest and bring construction to a halt. Together we can block Cop City.
Right. For 2 years, a movement has been building. This movement has drawn in people from all walks of life, and using all means of resistance, canvassing, pressure campaigns, speaking out at City Hall, children's marches, traditional Muskogee stomp dances, music festivals, weeks of action, sabotage, and demonstration all across the country. This is the secret of the movement's inner strength, that it is large enough to contain multitudes, and that it finds within itself an endless capacity for innovation.
The beating heart of the movement has been in the forest. A protest encampment in the forest itself, sustained for over a year, has been key to the movement's effectiveness. Forest defenders, sometimes dozens, at other times hundreds, sleeping in tents and tree houses, put their lives on hold and their bodies on the line. Their determination and courage captured the national imagination. By physically blocking construction, this opened space and bought time for many other effective ways of participating to become possible.
The movement now faces unprecedented repression. A series of multi-agency police raids on the protest encampment have finally cleared the way for construction. During a raid on January 18th, our beloved comrade Manuel Tortuguita
Paez Terra
was shot and killed by police. 43 forest defenders now face preposterous, quote-unquote, domestic terrorism charges.
We are proposing a strategy to grow beyond the repression. The efforts to defeat the movement have backfired. The repression has catapulted a seemingly local struggle into the forefront of national consciousness. More people than ever are getting involved and the momentum is only growing. What's needed is simply to give form and direction to this momentum and scale up our resistance.
The movement to stop Cop City is more popular than ever. 116,000 local residents have signed a petition for a referendum in Cop City, which would allow the people of Atlanta to decide the project's fate through a popular vote. However, the mayor's administration continues to undermine the democratic process, now refusing to even count the petition signatures in a bad faith legal runaround.
But construction can begin any day. Over 85 acres of forest have been clear-cut. Without a legal order to halt construction, whatever happens at the ballot box will be too late.
We will have to do it ourselves. The people will have to enforce their own stop work order. This is the only way to honor the overwhelming popular sentiment in favor of ending this project. With our future on the line and the whole world watching, we'll take a stand to bend the course of history.
Hell yeah. All right, next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so today I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Cop City is. I don't usually have it behind me. I'm going to tell you how and why people have opposed it, a little history of the movement. I'm going to tell you about this next exciting action that we're planning, and I'm going to invite you all to form yourselves into affinity groups, come to Atlanta, and make history with us. Next slide. Oh, I can see it over there too, thank you. So what is Cop City? So the movement named this training facility, quote unquote, Cop City, because it plans to build a mock city to train police in urban protest suppression tactics. It's going to have firing ranges, explosive facilities, dorm-style living quarters for cops from all over the country, and even places as far-flung as Israel to come to Atlanta and train in urban warfare tactics. Also, urban gardens worked by imprisoned youth have been proposed in these construction plans. Yeah, boo. So these plans kicked into high gear in 2021, as we've spoken about already today. What happened in the summer of 2020? The George Floyd uprising. We all remember that. The biggest popular uprising in our nation's history. So it's not a coincidence, and I'll talk a little bit about that more later. So next slide. So here's a little map of the land where they're trying to build Cop City. A little history of the land. So once upon a time, it was inhabited by the Muskogee tribe, Native Americans. They were violently displaced by settler colonialism. After that, it was a farm, a plantation worked by slaves, largely. And after that, after the end of slavery, it became a prison farm until 1990. So there you see that thread continued of, enforcing the racial caste system in America that American capitalism runs on. From 1990 to today, it's been a public park, a publicly owned park, and a beautiful forest where people from the Black working class neighborhood around it play. They go there with their kids. They have picnics. It's a beautiful place. It's got great vibes, and I really feel like I'm carrying a little bit of it around inside of me when I go on these events. Not only is the forest nice, it is also very ecologically important for the city of Atlanta. So we've got experts saying that the air quality in Atlanta would be substantially worse if they cut down this 300-acre forest. Also, it helps keep flooding from being even worse. So we really need this forest to protect, especially the neighborhoods right around it, from the worst effects of climate change. So why are they trying to build Cop City? We talked about that a little bit. We saw a massive uprising in 2020, and they want to stop that. And actually, interestingly enough, in the RICO charges, they date the start of the conspiracy as the day that George Floyd was murdered. Now, the plans for Cop City had not even been announced yet then. So they are making a very explicit connection between this and the movement against prisons and police that really rose up in 2020. They are thinking of it that way, and they are trying to make protest illegal, and they are trying to make activism illegal. So they said it. They showed their ass on that. Next slide. So, yeah, we're on tour right now. This is what I'm doing. The Atlanta police are also on tour. What you see here is an ad in the New York City subway for a recruitment event that they had recently. Yeah, trying to find people from all over the place to become cops, come to Atlanta, and basically fight us. So, once again, they are thinking about this as a very important choke point in the battle for, you know, freedom, for who's going to be in control of the people's destinies. We need to think about that too. Part of why they're building this training facility is because after 2020, they were having recruitment problems. They're like, oh man, the cops are sad. Nobody likes us. Maybe people don't want to be cops anymore. Not that long after George Floyd was murdered, the police in Atlanta murdered Rayshard Brooks, who was an unarmed black man who fell asleep in his car in a Wendy's parking lot. The cops that murdered Rayshard Brooks, eventually the charges were dropped, but they were indicted, and that was enough to make the cops in Atlanta sad. So, next slide. So they're not just trying to build Cop City in Atlanta, they are trying to build cop cities all over the country. However, a few similar projects have already been canceled because this one was getting so much heat. So I think that just shows again the national importance and the fact that all eyes are on Atlanta. Next slide. So, another interesting thing about this movement is that it stitches together the environmental movement, right? The movement to save the world from climate change, with the movement against police and prisons. How are these things connected? Well, as climate change worsens around the world, there are really a couple options, a couple ways things could go, right? We could have a global restructuring of the economy and a massive expropriation of private property for the public good, wherever, yes, good, yes, we want that. That is one way. That is how we actually save the world from climate change. But, you know, the state under capitalism is going to protect private property at all costs, even at the cost of being able to live and survive on this planet. So, whenever people are trying to save the world from climate change, and that involves breaking the law, which often it will necessarily, who do they send? Who do they send when there are indigenous water protectors trying to prevent the building of a pipeline through native lands? Who do they send when people are sitting in a tree trying to keep it from being cut down? Because now is a very bad time to be cutting down trees, folks. They send the cops. They send the fucking cops. So that's right. The movement for the earth must be a movement against the police. And we have that on a sticker if you want it. I left them in my car, but I'll get them right after this. Yeah. Next slide. Oh yeah, so now we have a Muskogee tribesman, an activist, talking a little bit about his perspective. And I think it's really important that the Muskogee people are involved with this fight to take the land back and take care of it in the way that they used to do for thousands of years. So let's hear from him. Oh, is there sound? Is that working? No.
I tried to connect the speaker.
Hold on a second. Let's try it's like this Bluetooth?
Yeah, it said it connected, but I don't know if the HDMI is going to override it.
It never fucking works. Well, I guess we could skip it if we need to.
Let's not skip it.
That's sad.
It doesn't have captions.
It does have captions.
Yeah,
It's got captions.
we can hear the volume.
Oh, yeah.
So I read the captions out loud?
Yeah, sure.
My name is Charles. I'm here in the
All right, cool.
just outside of the city of Atlanta in the state of Georgia. It was only a few months ago that I stood in this place, reintroducing this natural world to my cousins. I spoke to right I have been on this earth. And I introduced my children to this forest and showed them the territorial domains where our ancestors thrived and from which they were violently removed from. I assisted in the first of many migrations of Muskogee people back to our homelands in hopes of educating our people that it even exists, and we have a right to walk upon them and live as we see fit. But I am here also in hopes of educating others of how to exist in this world, how to exist in harmony and balance with all of creation and all of its diversity, reminding us that violence in all of its many forms only eliminates the energy of life found in all. What is happening now in the Wilana Forest and also in the rest of the world is violence. Extractive industries and political entities are continuing to lead the way in perpetuation of this violence in this country and abroad. The destruction of one tree in violence impacts all of life. The desecration of one waterway can have harm to every member of this world. The so-called construction of a militarized facility to train paramilitary forces is violent. Its impact on the suffering our communities locally and potentially across the world is unmeasurable. It must stop before more harm even takes place. Today I stand in solidarity with land defenders and allies who are working, petitioning, and acting at every level to end this violence. I stand in solidarity with those who have recognized the dangers of this facility and are working to speak the truth. I was taught by my elders to act accordingly with the interest of those lives yet to come to this world in mind in all of my actions. My hope is that they will not have to suffer. I pray that this forest will still be intact when I am able to make footprints upon it once again, footprints that lay over those of my ancestors who walked here for millennium after millennium. I call upon all persons to join this movement and
Yeah, it's come up at the end, but he said like, so that our children will be able to live in peace for generations to come. So, we know we need to stop Cop City. What's being done about that? What has been done so far? Next slide. So, this is a decentralized autonomous movement with many different groups involved, many different people, but every group has a real respect for diversity of tactics. So what that means is, some people might be canvassing for the referendum, some people might be sabotaging the construction site, but we all respect each other because we're all fighting for the same goal. And that has led to a very healthy, powerful, and effective movement. So yes, what are some of the things people have done? You see here, a little bit of sabotage on the construction site, which is actually one of the, I think the very first action against Cop City was an act of sabotage on the construction site in 2021. So every group that's come in since then has had to kind of reckon with that and respect it. Next slide. Yeah, so there are a number of private backers of the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is a fake-ass charity that they made, right? Anyone can set up a 501c3 to fund this thing. Kind of creepy to think about why private corporations are funding something that's allegedly a public good, right? Kind of makes you think about who the cops really exist to serve and protect. But there are all these private backers. Next slide. And one thing activists have done, they've interrupted corporate board meetings. They have embarrassed these people in front of everybody. They have showed up at their houses and yelled at them. And that actually has worked. A few of the backers have pulled out already, but there are still a lot left that we need to contend with, including like all the evilest companies you can think of, you know, Bank of America, Norfolk Southern, remember them? The people who did the airborne toxic event because they didn't want to fucking staff their freight trains properly. Yeah.
Brakes on the train.
The greatest hits. Next slide. Oh yes, there have been 6 weeks of action so far, and they often feature fun music festivals in the forest. Those are pictures of that. Next slide. Yeah, there have been a number of encampments. They've been cleared a few times. They've gone back a few times. I think right now the repression has gotten so bad that the encampment portion of the movement is over, at least for now. But the encampments were super great. from a few dozen to hundreds of people in the forest at once. There were some tree sits. You see there's a tree house there for people to sit in and keep the trees from being cut down. Also, you see that free YSL and all prisoners banner that somebody made. Now, fun fact, the 3 RICO cases in the Georgia AG's office right now are Donald Trump, Young Thug, and us. So they really have their hands full. Obviously, we stand with Young Thug and the whole Young Stoner Life crew. Donald Trump, not so much, but yeah. I mean, the Young Thug case is also very interesting and something to really check out because they're using RICO to go after, not only political thought, but like artistic expression of any kind. They're using a rapper's lyrics to try to incriminate him in court. It's really bad. Next slide. Yes, there have been a number of religious ceremonies in the forest. We had a Purim party when I was there, which was very fun. All different religions. It's a really nice place to have a ceremony because you really feel the vibes. Next slide. Yeah, there have been some peaceful marches. You see some members of the Faith Coalition Against Cop City on the upper right-hand corner. Just to tell City Hall what's up. Next slide. Yeah, there have been some Muskogee tribal stomp dances, so it's really cool to see them bring their traditions back to the place where they came from and the place where hopefully they're going to be able to return to if they want to once we take it back. Next slide. Yeah, there have been some black blocs. There have been some spicy black blocs, and like I said, no one's denouncing anyone else's tactics in this fight. This is from the day after Tortuguita was murdered. It was widely thought of as the Revenge March, and yes, some of the banks that support Cop City had their property damaged. Boo-hoo. Next slide. Yeah, they killed a person the day before, so I feel like it was justified. Yes, we also had a bouncy house for the kids. This was at the South River Music Festival, which was a really fun time until the cops showed up, raided the festival, pointed their loaded guns in the bouncy house. Luckily, there were no kids in there when that happened, but just like one more example of the fucking terrifying, ridiculous, and outsized response to a festival of music and protest. Next slide. Oh yes, you see some Muskogee activists here delivering a notice of eviction to Mayor Andre Dickens in his office, demanding that they do not build Cop City, an instrument of, racial violence and class exploitation on their native lands. They also asked for an independent investigation into the assassination of Tortuguita and that the trumped-up charges be dropped against all Weelaunee forest defenders. Next slide. There have also been some tree planting festivals. Okay, so, one nice thing about nature is that it always comes back, right? The forest was clear-cut not that long ago to create the slave plantation. So a lot of the forest we see now is a new growth forest, and the trees are pretty tall already. So we've had some tree planting, and that's probably going to be an element of the action I'm about to tell you about. Next slide. We've had some children's marches. Very fun, very cute when the kids show up. As it turns out, the kids care about trees, the kids care about the environment, and yeah, we love to have them. You love to see it. Next slide. Okay, so this was from June. This is a record-breaking city council meeting where over 1,000 people showed up to attend the protest against funding the Cop City project. We had 14 hours of testimony from the public, unanimously opposed to Cop City. Yeah. That's right. You see the Reverend Kiana Jones on the upper left-hand corner talking about why we don't want Cop City on our land. If you want to be inspired, look her up on YouTube. She's really great. Next slide. Oh yes, this stock photo is of our referendum campaign. Next slide. So, over 120,000 signatures have been collected from registered voters in Atlanta to get a referendum on the ballot in order to let the people actually vote on whether or not they want Cop City built. Now, it's important to note, the people who live in the neighborhood right where they're trying to build Cop City, they can't vote in Atlanta. They cannot vote for Atlanta City Council. There's no accountability there. They are not even eligible to sign the petition, even though there are a number of counties that make up metropolitan Atlanta. They decided that you have to live in Atlanta proper, and that's by design, because these people are completely disenfranchised from this very important decision that affects them. However, the people in the rest of Atlanta also don't want Cop City. So this has actually never happened in the history of Atlanta, collecting enough signatures to get the referendum on the ballot. You need 50,000, okay? It's a small city, there's about 500,000 people there. They got 120,000 signatures, and this is them delivering it, yeah. Boxes and boxes to City Hall. Twice the number of people who voted for Andre Dickens in the last election signed this petition, yeah. That's more than 1 in 5 Atlanta residents. That's pretty crazy. However, the mayor's office is doing everything it can to try to keep this referendum from happening. They're actually using a voter suppression tactic called signature matching, where if your signature on the referendum petition doesn't match the signature you have on file, maybe you had a baby in your arm, maybe you had some groceries, they're going to try and throw it out and keep the people from voting. Now, the referendum was supposed to be on the ballot in November, but the city has delayed it to March at least. March is also when the Republican primary is going to be, so that might be part of their thinking there. You know, it's going to bring out more conservative law and order types, but obviously they want to put it off forever if they can. Next slide. You know, this slide, I'm going to get rid of it. What hasn't the movement done? Well, we'll talk about it. But yeah, it hasn't made a central organization that controls who can do what, who can say what. Everyone respects each other's tactics. And it has not bought into these state narratives of white outside agitators and violent extremists, right? This is a very old, very racist narrative going back to the time of slavery, saying that, you know, people who are racialized as black, they're okay with being in a subordinate position in society, and it's only when, you know, these white communists and Jews and whatnot come to the South and get them riled up, that's when they get upset, right? We know that's bullshit, but they're still trying to say that. Next slide. So yes, the pressure is working. We have had a number of victories already. A number of contractors have pulled out of the project because it was just not worth it for this one contract. You're getting your shit sabotaged, your insurance goes up, they don't want to deal with it. Some funders have pulled out. A professor resigned from the Atlanta Police Foundation after facing student protests and floods of phone calls. So, you know, these kids are all right. Yeah. Next slide. So because these tactics have been so effective of this broad and diverse movement, the state has ramped up the repression to 11. What you see on the upper right-hand corner there, the one that looks like it's from Guantanamo Bay, that is the bond hearing from people who were arrested at the music festival just for being there. The cops were mad. They were big mad that day because they couldn't catch the Black Bloc people who did a little sabotage on the construction site. So they retaliated, right? Because they're thinking about this as a war against their own citizens. And they went to the music festival, and some people were just trying to see Faye Webster, and they got arrested and put in that room. I should talk a little bit about the charges as well. About 100 people in the movement are now facing charges. 42 people facing domestic terrorism charges. 3 people were charged with felony intimidation for flyering. 61 people are facing RICO charges, and the indictments came down last week. It's quite the read if you want to be, laughing and crying at the same time. But on some level, it makes me feel a little better because they really don't know shit. Like, there's really not much in there that you need an informant to find out. Like, good job, you read the Wikipedia page on anarchism. What else? And then, okay, this is sad. Of course, on the left is Tortuguita, our comrade who was shot in a multi-agency raid. According to the cops who planted a gun and tweeted it in a cartoonish way, according to the cops, Tortuguita shot them first. However, according to the autopsy that was later released, Tortuguita was sitting on the ground, cross-legged, in their tent, with their hands in the air. It's very hard to fire a gun when you're sitting in that position. There was also no gunpowder residue found on their hands, which would have been there if they had shot the cops. And for this act of non-violence, Tortuguita was shot at least 57 times in a multi-agency raid. I don't think we're ever gonna get the full story of what exactly happened there. There was an officer wounded, but there is also another officer on body cam footage speculating, oh, did this one cop shoot the other cop? It smells like a rat. It's totally fucked. But one nice thing, I mean, obviously this is a travesty, but one nice thing that's happened since is Tort's mom, Belkis Tehran, as well as their brother and father, have come from Venezuela to the US to try to get justice for their relative, and they've joined the movement. They've since joined the movement, and they're carrying on the fight that that Tortuguita was very much a part of, so yeah. Really cool to see. Tort's mom has spoken a lot. Tort's dad is a little more introverted, but he actually spoke at one of these speaking events in Madison, Wisconsin the other night as part of this same tour, and his words were very powerful. So, next slide. So why are we doing a mass nonviolent direct action now? Next slide. So the movement is caught in an interesting place at the present moment. More people than ever know about Cop City, more people than ever oppose Cop City, not just in Atlanta, but all over the country and even internationally. However, the number of people who are willing to show up and do direct action, direct embodied action, has dwindled. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Largely the repression, right? It is scary, it's terrifying. They're trying to scare us. They're trying to sap the movement's resources. They're trying to turn us against one another. And so we need a way through this. We need a way out. We need a way for people to feel like they can show up and do embodied action again. And we need a response to these ridiculous, ridiculous charges that serves to delegitimize them even further than they already are. And you know, even mainstream legal scholars are already calling this an absurd bit of state overreach. So, next slide. Next slide. So, one movement whose legacy we're drawing on is the anti-nuclear movement of the 1970s. They got a number of ecologically hazardous nuclear power plans canceled with mass occupations of nuclear sites, or proposed nuclear sites. Next slide. Of course, we are also acting in the mold of the civil rights movement, which has a deep legacy in Atlanta. Here you see Martin Luther King and his comrades doing an act of civil disobedience. Next slide. More civil rights movement. I think you all know about this. It's super important to carry on that thread, and you know, even in the face of the political class in Atlanta trying to pretend like, oh, it's woke to build a police training center. Like the first name they're trying to give it was the Institute for Social Justice and like police training. Yeah, you can't make this shit up. Next slide. So yeah, this is a strategy to grow the movement through the repression. Next slide. Oh wait, now go back. So why have we chosen a nonviolent act of civil disobedience? We did not choose it in order to separate out good activists from bad activists. Again, we do not denounce any tactics in this fight. We're not trying to separate out, oh, you're violent, you're non-violent. And a lot of the time when they say violent, what they mean is violence to property, violence to fucking windows and shit. This movement hasn't hurt or killed a single human being. The cops, in addition to killing a person, have beat a number of people very badly, in addition to the violence of, being arrested and locked in a cage. So, who's the terrorists, really? Yeah, that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because it feels strategic in this moment, and because we are on the right side of history. We need a way to grow the movement through the repression. So how are we going to do that? So we are going to organize ourselves into affinity groups. Ooh, is there a slide on that? Is there a next slide? Yes. So we're going to organize ourselves into affinity groups. That's a sort of a buddy system of 5 to 10 people. Hopefully they know each other, they trust each other. Maybe they've organized together before. They don't have to, but they need to have some, affinity, personal affinity. They can travel together to Atlanta. They can help keep each other safer, check in, and they also form sort of the basic unit of the way that we're going to decide things as we go. So next slide. So you got your affinity groups, right? Now we have a thing called a spokes council. So one person from every affinity group is selected to represent that group in the big spokes council. So it's still a very horizontal, anarchistic model where everyone gets a say and nobody's like in charge. But yeah, everyone's going to get a say. We're going to have some spokes councils the weekend of the action. We've certainly been making a plan. We're not going to start with a blank slate, but I think it's really important that everybody who's coming to this gets to have some input on what we're doing. And I should also note some of the details are going to be left up to the day, because the conditions on the ground are always changing, and we're going to have recon right up until that morning to make sure that we know what's what and we know what we're doing. Next slide. Okay, yeah, so what are we actually going to do? Like I said, some of the details have yet to be worked out, but we are definitely going to meet somewhere off-site that morning. We are going to organize ourselves into a few different marches. We're going to enter the construction site from a few different places that may or may not involve cutting some fences. And we're going to occupy. We're going to occupy the construction site en masse and leave eventually at the end of the day. But between those two times, there's going to be some tree planting. There's going to be some community events, probably some music. It's going to be a very powerful and nice thing to experience. Now, this is going to be preceded by 2 full days of nonviolent direct action trainings, where all of the affinity groups will get trained in de-escalation tactics. They will get trained in how to stay safer, what to do in different scenarios depending what the cops are doing. So it's very important that everybody feels prepared for that, as well as to make decisions kind of on the fly. Now, we don't know what the cops are going to do. However, we have some strategies in place against repression here. So a lot of the time when bad stuff happens with the cops, it's because people panic and they scatter, and the cops pick them off one by one. They can do whatever they want when they've got you alone in the dark. However, we've got 1,000 people standing together. That is much less likely to happen if they know how to stick together and how to de-escalate things. Now, in terms of the legal aspect of this, right? Hypothetically, they could arrest 1,000 people, including children and clergy, and charge them with domestic terrorism for doing a nonviolent act of civil disobedience in the mold of Martin Luther King. They could do that. However, that would be an international outrage, and it seems fairly unlikely, although possible. It would also, if they did that, serve to delegitimize these types of charges and show even more so how ridiculous they are for the people already facing them and people facing them in the future. However, if the state decides to charge people less, than they have in the past. That will also serve to delegitimize the charges that people are already facing, right? Because if people get charged with misdemeanors, which is what you usually get charged for with this kind of protest, for something that people were charged with terrorism for doing the exact same thing a few months ago, people are also going to wonder, like, what's up with that? So it puts the state in a bit of a bind, and I think serves to help the people who've already been arrested. Next slide. Oh yes, and we don't need the next slide. This is the next slide. Okay, go back. So the other day, a group of people from the Faith Coalition to Stop Cop City, they did a similar type of action on the construction site, a People Stop Work order. And they chained themselves to the equipment. They were arrested. They got out on misdemeanor charges, which again is more in line with what usually happens when people do this kind of thing. So that makes me think the state is ramping back a little. They realize they overplayed their hand. They're making themselves look like fascists. You know, they try to be a little sneakier with the fascism usually. But yeah, also it makes me feel good that different corners of the movement are converging on this as a tactic independently of one another. Makes me feel like, you know, we're on the right track. So, next slide. Next slide, next slide. We're also going to have a lot of legal support available. People will not be on their own if they get arrested. And if anyone is not comfortable doing the direct action that day, there's going to be lots of support roles for people who want to be in a support role. There's also going to be solidarity actions all over the country and things you can do to support, but we really want as many people as possible to come to Atlanta because, like I said, there's safety in numbers, and there is a floor below which we will not do this because it will not be safe. It's going to be decided exactly what that is the weekend of the action. Next slide. Oh, and I should also mention there are some resources available. If people want to get some buses, get their friends together, come down to Atlanta. We have resources for you. It's being worked on right now. Some churches are going to be opening their doors to house people, which is good on a number of levels, right? It's good because people need a place to sleep, and it's good because it would be a really bad look for the cops to raid a fucking church. So, you are hereby invited to form an affinity group, make your plans to come to Atlanta, attend NVDA trainings there, also concerts and parties, that's gonna be super fun, and make history with us. Yay! Thank you so much. So now, we're going to do a little exercise, but first I want to put that QR code up on the screen for people to RSVP. So you can either, yeah, there we go. You can either just sign up for the mailing list, or if you're interested in coming to Atlanta, show of hands. How many people are interested in